Millionaire didn't know about his children, shocked when they appeared at Arlington National Cemetery. Welcome to a remarkable journey filled with secrets, heartbreak, and an unexpected reunion. In this riveting tale, we follow the life of a wealthy man who believed he had everything except, as fate would have it, knowledge of his own children. The revelation unfolds on the solemn grounds of Arlington National Cemetery, where dormant truths awaken and destinies collide. Prepare for an enthralling adventure that will keep you on the edge of your seat, captivated by each suspenseful twist. Now, let's begin. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Arthur Lancaster was a self-made millionaire who had long considered himself a lone wolf in a crowded world. Despite the clamor of corporate success and the weight of privilege on his shoulders, he privately believed his wealth had been earned through blood, sweat, and steely determination. Every morning he stood before a towering window in his penthouse apartment in Bethesda, Maryland, watching the sun rise over the Potomac, certain that he knew every facet of his destiny. Yet there was one truth he never suspected: the existence of children he had unknowingly fathered, children who would one day alter the course of his life under the unlikeliest of circumstances. It began on a crisp November evening. The streets were illuminated by holiday lights, and Arthur found himself restless in his office at Lancaster Holdings, a prestigious real estate conglomerate he'd built from the ground up. At precisely 8 in the evening, his personal assistant, Margaret, timidly knocked on the door, bearing unsettling news. Her face was pale, eyes flickering with apprehension, as if she were about to deliver a message that would capsize the carefully orchestrated harmony of Arthur's world. In her trembling hand, Margaret held a letter that had arrived in the mailroom by express courier, addressed to Arthur in a cramped, old-fashioned script. No return address, no indication of its origin, just the name Arthur Lancaster emblazoned on the front. Arthur wasn't one for unnecessary theatrics, but there was something strangely foreboding about the way Margaret hovered, reluctant to break the silence. He took the letter from her, and as she left, he felt the weight of the unknown pressing down upon him. The letter bore a single puzzling message: "You owe a debt only your children can reveal." Signed with initials that read simply EWEVEN. More startling, included with the letter was a photograph, a snapshot of a nondescript headstone among the neat rows at Arlington National Cemetery. No dates, no visible name, just a small American flag at the base of the grave, and in the distance, the unmistakable silhouette of the tomb of the unknown soldier. Arthur found the image unsettling. He dismissed it as a bizarre hoax at first, possibly orchestrated by a disgruntled former colleague or an adversary from his cutthroat corporate battles. But the mention of children planted a seed of unease in his heart that he couldn't brush aside. For days, Arthur grappled with what he had received, sleepless nights, punctuated by strange dreams of endless rows of white headstones that seemed to whisper secrets to him. He tried in vain to trace the courier. None of his staff could find any record of the sender's name, and the delivery company cited confidentiality. Even the best private investigator he'd hired, one whose skill in uncovering hidden agendas had once saved Arthur from a massive embezzlement scheme, drew a blank. It was as though the letter had been conjured from thin air. The next shock arrived exactly a week later when Arthur's longtime accountant, Charles Donahue, requested an urgent meeting. Arthur was taken aback. Charles was as steady as a rock and disliked dramatics. When he walked into Arthur's office, Charles's normally placid expression was contorted with worry. and his voice wavered as he revealed a potential financial irregularity linked to Arthur's estate planning documents. According to Charles, a certain educational endowment trust had been taking a modest but steady monthly withdrawal from Arthur's personal accounts for nearly 30 years. It wasn't a large sum for a man of his wealth, barely a drop in the ocean, but it was unusual because Arthur had no recollection of ever approving such an arrangement. Arthur's chest tightened as he examined the relevant documents. There, among a tangle of official forms and bank receipts, were references to two beneficiaries identified only by initials, R.L. Land A.L. The line in the bank statement read, "Educational Trust for R.L. Land A.L." The earliest transaction dated back over 3 decades, indicating a setup that aligned suspiciously with the time he was in college, back when he was too ambitious and carefree to pay attention to the consequences of his fleeting romances. Suddenly, the cryptic message from EW took on a new dimension. Could these mysterious beneficiaries be his children? Arthur felt his heart pound. Regret, confusion, and a strange flicker of hope formed a chaotic storm within him. He had always believed he was childless. Now, the thought that he might unknowingly have fathered 2 children left him reeling. Charles, for his part, was equally baffled. He admitted that the trust documents had been in a separate file, never flagged as suspicious before because the amounts withdrawn were negligible compared to Arthur's expansive fortune. Still, the gravity of the revelation was undeniable. Shaken, Arthur confided in Margaret, his trusted assistant, whose loyalty and discretion he valued above all else. She was profoundly shocked to hear that her employer might have 2 secret children. Yet, rather than scorn him for past mistakes, she offered comfort and pledged to use her formidable organizational skills to dig deeper, discreetly. Meanwhile, Arthur decided that he must investigate the possibility in person. The photograph of Arlington National Cemetery lingered in his mind, so he vowed to seek out answers there. In a surge of impulsive determination, Arthur cleared his schedule, instructing Margaret to cancel all his meetings for the week. Early the next morning, with barely a shred of a plan, he drove himself to the revered grounds of Arlington National Cemetery. He parked near the visitor's center, the crisp autumn air swirling fallen leaves around his shiny black sedan. As he entered the hallowed cemetery, a hush seemed to descend upon him. Row upon row of marble headstones stretched into the horizon, each one a silent testament to service and sacrifice. Arthur wandered through the pathways, uncertain of what he was looking for. Even though the photograph from the letter offered few clues, he clutched it tight, scrutinizing every detail. It took him hours until the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the cemetery in melancholy gold hues. Finally, near Section 60, a section known for housing many of the fallen from modern conflicts, he glimpsed a headstone that resembled the one in the photo. Bile rose in his throat when he realized it was indeed the same headstone, though still without a visible name. Upon closer inspection, he noticed that the inscription had worn away except for a small set of initials that looked like EWETCHED onto the corner. A fresh bouquet of white lilies lay on the grass nearby. He picked up the photograph and matched it perfectly to the gravestone in front of him. His pulse raced. Suddenly he felt a presence behind him. Turning abruptly, he found himself face to face with an older woman wearing a military uniform. She introduced herself as Lieutenant Colonel Valerie Hightower, a chaplain at the cemetery, her gaze unwavering and her posture radiating calm authority. "What brings you here, Mr. Lancaster?" she asked in a measured voice. Arthur was jolted by her directness. "How do you know my name?" he demanded, suspicion cracking through his usual veneer of confidence. Lieutenant Colonel Hightower studied him for a moment before responding. "I know many things that happen in this cemetery. I was informed by an old friend, someone who served with the occupant of this grave. He told me to expect you here. Arthur felt a chill creeping up his spine. I need to know who is buried here, he said softly, motioning toward the headstone. The inscriptions eroded, and I only have initials E.W. Hightower's expression turned solemn. This grave belongs to Eleanor Wright, she revealed. She was a nurse who served during the Gulf War and passed away under mysterious circumstances. She left behind complicated matters, but she always believed her children would find their father. The words rattled Arthur as though the ground beneath him had opened. Her children. She believed I was their father. The question sounded surreal on his tongue. Yes, Hightower replied, and she also believed you'd be here one day. She made arrangements in the event you came searching. In that moment, Arthur felt the strings of fate tighten around him. Eleanor Wright, the initials matched the letter, and if she had told this chaplain that Arthur might arrive one day, it meant Eleanor had orchestrated a puzzle stretching beyond the grave. Lieutenant Colonel Hightower beckoned him to follow, leading him to a small chapel near the eastern edge of the cemetery. There, in a modest office filled with religious texts and military memorabilia, the chaplain handed him a sealed envelope. These were Eleanor's final instructions. She requested that if you ever came looking for her, I should give this to you, Hightower said. Arthur's hand trembled as he tore the envelope open. Within, he found a short note and another photograph. The note read, "When you see them, tell them I did this for their own good. Take care of them, Eleanor." The photograph showed a younger Eleanor, radiant in her nurse's uniform, standing next to two teenagers, a boy and a girl with bright eyes and uncertain smiles. Arthur's mind spun. If this snapshot was taken decades ago, these children, his children, would now be adults. His eyes locked on the boy's features, a strong jaw that echoed Arthur's own profile, and the girl's determined stance that whispered of a Lancaster-like resolve. He swallowed painfully. After so many years, it was too late to make amends for lost birthdays and graduations. Still, he felt a surge of paternal instinct. He had to find them, to know them, and, if possible, to fix the past he never realized he had broken. But the chaplain had more to say. "You must understand," Hightower explained. "Eleanor was convinced that your separation from the children was necessary for their protection. She never fully explained why, but she alluded to dangerous people who sought to harm them if your identity as their father was revealed." Stunned, Arthur demanded more details, but Hightower could only shrug sadly. "This is everything I have. You should speak with Sergeant Glenn Roberts at Fort Myer. He might be able to explain more." Arthur left Arlington with an odd mixture of dread and hope swirling in his gut. That night, as he stood at his penthouse window, he felt for the first time in his life that the cityscape below him held no meaning. The neon lights, the triumphs of his corporate empire, none of it mattered until he found the two people who should have been his greatest treasures. The next morning, Arthur drove across the short distance to Fort Myer, the military installation adjacent to Arlington National Cemetery. There, in a cramped administrative building, he located Sergeant Glenn Roberts, a wiry man with probing eyes and a voice edged by years of strict discipline. Upon hearing Arthur mention Eleanor Wright, Roberts immediately stiffened, suspicion etched into every line on his face. "I haven't heard that name in a long time," he admitted, tapping a pencil against his desk. "She was a remarkable nurse, saved countless lives during the war, but she was involved in something bigger than the rest of us." Arthur pressed him for details, but Roberts responded cryptically, seeming to measure each word. He explained that Eleanor had gotten tangled with powerful individuals during the war, specifically some who had profited from covert operations. These individuals had targeted her when she threatened to expose their corruption. Fearing for her life and for the safety of her children, she removed them from the public eye, changing her own identity multiple times until settling in the DC career. Arthur's name had never appeared on any official record, except for a confidential paternity statement she had drawn up in case her children needed the proof one day. Intrigued and alarmed, Arthur pressed for more. Roberts, his demeanor suddenly grave, admitted there were rumors that these dark forces still lurked, even decades later. If they discovered that Arthur was connected to Eleanor's children, they might try to use them to get to him or to his wealth. But who are they? Arthur demanded, exasperated. Roberts gave a slight shake of his head. I can't say for certain, but if you want to protect your children, you must tread carefully. Despite his concerns for safety, Arthur was more determined than ever. He refused to let fear keep him from seeking out the son and daughter he never knew he had. With Roberts's guarded blessing, Arthur moved to the next phase of his search. He poured his resources into it, hiring cryptologists to decipher old letters from Eleanor, genealogists to trace her aliases, and advanced data experts to comb through public records. Days turned into weeks. Arthur's once brisk schedule of board meetings and press luncheons gave way to clandestine inquiries. Margaret juggled phone calls and arranged hush-hush appointments, ensuring Arthur's quest remained off the tabloids' radar. His own board members began to question his unusual absence, the shifting corporate responsibilities, but Arthur brushed them aside. Now that he knew his life had real stakes beyond money, he was unwilling to yield, no matter the cost. The turning point came on a frosty December night, when Margaret burst into Arthur's study at home, eyes alight with excitement. She had discovered a lead, a pair of siblings, Rose and Alexander Wright, both of whom had references linking them to Eleanor. They were living under different last names, adoptive guardians, it seemed, and had relocated throughout their childhoods for reasons never clearly stated. At present, Margaret's data suggested they might be residing near Richmond, Virginia. More precisely, Alexander was rumored to work as a paramedic, while Rose was believed to be a teacher. Heart-hammering, Arthur insisted they set out at once. By dawn, he and Margaret were on the highway, heading south to Richmond. Inside, Arthur wrestled with swirling questions. What would he say to them? How would he begin to atone for decades of absence? And would they even believe he was their father or want anything to do with him? Upon reaching Richmond, they first sought out Alexander's workplace, a bustling ambulance depot adjacent to a small hospital. Arthur stood awkwardly by the chain-link fence, scanning the paramedics as they came and went. Anxiety chewed at him, but he was buoyed by hope when he spotted a tall, broad-shouldered man who bore a striking resemblance to the boy in the old photograph. Summoning courage, Arthur stepped forward and called out, "Alexander?" The young man turned, confusion crossing his face. "Yes, do I know you?" Arthur felt his carefully rehearsed introduction vanish under the intensity of the moment. He managed, in a hoarse whisper, to say, "My name is Arthur Lancaster. I believe I'm your father." Alexander's immediate reaction was one of shock and skepticism, but a flicker of curiosity stirred in his eyes. He led Arthur to a nearby bench, where they spoke in low tones. Margaret kept a respectful distance, sensing the gravity of this encounter. Arthur fumbled to explain the truths he had only just learned, how he never knew about Eleanor's pregnancy, how the trust withdrawals had existed for years without his knowledge, how the letter from WHAD led him here. Alexander listened in stony silence. When Arthur showed him the photograph from the chapel, along with old documents that referenced him by name, the young man's rigid posture finally softened. His voice shook as he confessed that he'd long suspected his mother, Eleanor, harbored deeper secrets about his father. She had often alluded to a man who was powerful but kind, and that she kept him away only to protect them from the evil lurking in the shadows. Even so, Alexander never expected that man to appear in the flesh. "Is Rose okay?" Arthur asked cautiously, afraid to open old wounds. Alexander nodded. She's fine. She's teaching at a private school here, living in a small apartment. We've had to move around a bit over the years. Mum never told us why, but we always had this sense of being watched. Arthur's heart wrenched at the thought of their precarious upbringing. He hesitated, not wanting to push too far too fast, but the paternal instincts he never knew he had emerged fiercely. "Can I see her?" he asked. Alexander took a long moment, and finally he nodded. They arranged a meeting for that evening at a quiet diner. Rose arrived looking cautious, her intelligent gaze flicking from Alexander to Arthur. She seemed wary but curious, and the moment Arthur showed her the photograph from Arlington, tears pooled in her eyes. She whispered, "I thought I'd never know who you were." For hours, the three of them talked, confided, and laughed through tears of relief and pent-up emotion. Rose was a passionate teacher, a lover of literature and art. Alexander was a paramedic with a knack for saving lives. Arthur, for once in his life, felt he was part of something more meaningful than corporate takeovers or the relentless pursuit of wealth. But with that warmth came a cold, nagging feeling of danger. The shadows of Eleanor's warning loomed. Over the next several days, Arthur rented a modest home in Richmond so he could quietly spend time getting to know them. They had dinners, exchanged stories, and slowly bridged a lifetime of separation. Yet one night, as Arthur locked up the house, he sensed movement outside, a dark figure slipping into the shadows of the street. At first, he dismissed it as paranoia, but the next day, Margaret received a disturbing call. Their background checks on certain suspicious individuals had revealed that a group with ties to criminal operations during the Gulf War had shown renewed activity. It seemed too coincidental. The tension snapped one evening when an unmarked van began tailing Arthur's car. He tried to lose it in traffic, but it continued to pursue him doggedly. Incensed, Arthur called in a favor from a security firm he used for corporate protection, and they managed to corner the van in an alleyway. Inside, they found two men who refused to identify themselves. A scuffle ensued, and before the authorities could arrive, the men escaped into the night. Arthur was left standing there, pulse pounding, a new resolve burning in his chest. Whoever these people were, they would not harm his children. Faced with these threats, Arthur decided to move Rose and Alexander temporarily to a safe house near Fort Belvoir, a location recommended by Sergeant Roberts. It was a quiet place, surrounded by tall pines, with round-the-clock security. Both siblings protested, not wanting to disrupt their lives, but Arthur insisted, promising it would be temporary until he could figure out who was after them and why. Reluctantly, they agreed. Then, another cryptic twist arrived. Arthur received a second letter from an anonymous source placed under his windshield wiper in broad daylight. The note read, "Stop searching, or you'll end up like her." Attached was a photograph of Eleanor's headstone recently defaced, the flowers scattered, the letters E.W. scratched out. Fury and sorrow welled up within Arthur. He would not allow Eleanor's memory to be desecrated, and he would not be frightened away from his children. He doubled his security measures, hired round-the-clock bodyguards, and invoked every political connection he had to dig into the truth. Through a retired senator he once supported, Arthur discovered there were rumors about a top-secret operation called Saber, which had links to war profiteering during the Gulf War. Eleanor, as a nurse, had apparently witnessed atrocities involving chemical weapons. She threatened to go public with what she knew, making her a target of the conspirators behind Saber. They believed she had stashed incriminating documents somewhere. If those documents still existed, and if her children had them, they could be in grave danger. Desperate to uncover the truth and protect Rose and Alexander, Arthur confronted them gently. asking if Eleanor had ever left them any keepsakes or letters. At first, they shook their heads. But then Rose remembered an old suitcase that had belonged to their mother. She retrieved it from storage and carefully opened it for the first time in years. Inside were diaries, medals from Eleanor's service, and a worn, locked metal box. When they pried it open, they found dog tags Eleanor's, and beneath them, a slim folder. Its contents sent a chill racing down Arthur's spine. Documents detailing illegal arms deals, covert experiments with hazardous materials, and bribery of high-ranking officials. Realizing the explosive nature of this evidence, Arthur quickly contacted Lieutenant Colonel Hightower for advice. Hightower advised contacting Army CID Criminal Investigation Division or the Department of Defense Inspector General, but warned that some of the individuals named in the documents might still hold power. In the days that followed, Arthur took every precaution. He personally escorted Rose and Alexander to a secret meeting with trusted officials, handing over the incriminating file. The officials promised a thorough investigation, but the undercurrent of fear remained. Arthur stayed vigilant, expecting retaliation. True to form, it arrived in a shocking manner. Late one night, at the safe house near Fort Belvoir, armed men in dark clothing tried to break in. Alarms blared. Security personnel engaged the intruders. Bullets tore through the air, and in the chaos, Arthur and his children were hastily escorted to an underground panic room. Alexander, refusing to cower, joined the security team, using his paramedic training to aid an injured guard. Rose huddled with Arthur, trembling but resolute. After a terrifying standoff, the attackers fled, leaving behind a wounded accomplice who was apprehended. Under questioning, he revealed that his employers believed Eleanor's children possessed documents that could unravel a sprawling network of corruption, and they were willing to do anything to get their hands on them. But by then, it was too late for them. Arthur had already turned over the documents. Within days, a major federal investigation launched. Indictments came swiftly, roping in several high-profile individuals who had remained untouchable for decades. The conspirators' dark web of influence collapsed in a spectacular display of legal retribution. A sense of justice glimmered through the fear, giving Arthur and his children the first glimpse of hope for a peaceful future. Amid this tempest, Arthur felt the sting of guilt for the decades he had missed. He vowed to make amends. In a heartfelt gesture, he invited Rose and Alexander to join him at Arlington National Cemetery for a ceremony honoring Eleanor. They agreed. On a crisp winter's morning, beneath a sky of soft grey clouds, they gathered at Eleanor's grave. The vandalized headstone had been restored, a brand new marble marker inscribed with her full name, Eleanor Marie Wright, along with her service details. White roses and lilies adorned the site. As they stood in silent tribute, a military honor guard arrived, arranged by Lieutenant Colonel Hightower. Taps echoed through the chilled air, a haunting melody that brought tears to everyone's eyes. It was a moment of closure and a beginning all at once. Arthur reached out, placed a hand on each of his children's shoulders, and promised that, from this day forward, they would be family no longer fractured by secrets and distant fears. Yet fate wasn't done unveiling its twists. After the ceremony, while the trio lingered at the memorial, an elderly gentleman approached them, leaning on a cane, his eyes brimming with tears. He whispered something that made Rose gasp. "I served with your mother. She saved my life. I've been waiting to see her children. She always said you'd come here one day." The man introduced himself as Captain Terence Billings, now retired. He offered them a small stack of letters, each addressed to Rose and Alexander. Eleanor had written them long ago, in the final months of her life, but she never got a chance to deliver them. Through Captain Billings, They learned that Eleanor had spent her last days anxiously preparing for a time when her children could live free from threats. Each letter brimmed with motherly advice, confessions of regret, and abiding love. Reading them beneath Arlington's towering trees, the siblings sobbed softly, feeling their mother's presence linger in every word. Arthur felt an immense sadness wash over him, realizing how much Eleanor had sacrificed, how lonely her final years must have been. He knelt and pressed his palm against the cool marble, whispering his gratitude and his apologies. In the hush of that sacred ground, he thought he heard the rustle of leaves, as though Eleanor's spirit approved of this long-awaited resolution. And so, life began anew for the Lancaster family. Freed from the hidden threat, Rose and Alexander emerged from the shadows they had known for so long, embracing a father they once thought they'd never meet. Arthur, no longer the lonely titan of industry, discovered a profound sense of purpose in helping his children find their paths forward. He offered financial support, but more importantly, he offered them his time and devotion. Together, they took strides to heal from the trauma. They continued to visit Arlington, paying respects to Eleanor and volunteering at veterans' events. Honoring the sacrifices of those who rested there, Rose discovered renewed inspiration for her teaching, channeling her experiences into empathy for her students. Alexander expanded his paramedic skills, eventually enrolling in a specialized trauma rescue program to serve communities afflicted by disasters. And Arthur, for his part, transformed Lancaster Holdings into a philanthropic powerhouse, focusing on programs for veteran support and medical care, partly as a tribute to Eleanor's nursing legacy. But the story did not end quietly. The men who had orchestrated the break-in and threatened their lives did not go unpunished. One by one, members of the old Iron Saber Circle were tried in court. Their downfall made headlines across the nation as the dark underbelly of war profiteering was laid bare. The karmic retribution that followed was swift and decisive, giving Arthur and his children a sense of vindication. Yet the greatest karmic arc was for Arthur himself. Once an isolated millionaire, he discovered that no measure of wealth could replace the warmth of family. In that sense, the retribution was also a gift, a second chance at life, with the two amazing individuals he had unknowingly helped bring into the world. He recognized that he had been spared a hollow existence consumed only by profit. Instead, love and familial bonds had come knocking at his door at a time he least expected. The final, poignant twist occurred on a serene spring afternoon. Arthur and his children gathered for a small dedication ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery. They unveiled a plaque commissioned by Arthur in tribute to the medical personnel who served alongside Eleanor during the Gulf War, especially those who risked their lives to expose wrongdoing. Lieutenant Colonel Hightower led the invocation, her voice resonant with hope. Captain Billings, frail yet proud, stood by to pay respects. Flowers in vibrant bloom softened the rows of white headstones, and the entire cemetery seemed to glow under the gentle sunlight. In that solemn, beautiful moment, Arthur knew that life's greatest fortunes were not measured in zeros on a bank statement, but in the immeasurable gift of unity and redemption. He glanced at Rose and Alexander, saw the love in their eyes, and felt whole. The emptiness he had once tried to fill with ambition was now brimming with gratitude. As they laid flowers on Eleanor's grave, a sense of peaceful finality washed over them. The millionaire who didn't know about his children had found them under the strangest of circumstances, and together they had faced dangers that tested their bond. Now, standing amidst the silent guardians of Arlington, they had forged a future bright with possibilities. Thank you for joining us on this emotional and suspenseful journey. We've witnessed how a powerful secret uncovered in the revered grounds of Arlington National Cemetery transformed a wealthy man's life forever. Hidden children, lost love, and sinister threats collided to deliver a riveting tale of karmic retribution, ultimate redemption, and the unbreakable strength of family. If you found this story captivating, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more compelling narratives that illuminate the extraordinary power of fate and the indomitable human spirit.